So this is what we have already on our main file, right? And then we mostly be working around creating new users into the database. So we work a lot on this. There are some few touches that we need to make it very perfect. But right now, let's go and do the other basic functions like getting a user from the database. So we'll be focusing on this endpoint mostly. So how to get a particular user from the database. There are various ways that thing can be done. So if you want to fetch the user from the database, you can either get the user by the ID, you can get the user's ID from the front end and use it to request for the entire data about the user from the backend. So we are going to start with the ID. Then I will now challenge you to get user through by the email. It's also simple, follow the same format. So now this is the endpoint that we are going to use, and the endpoint, let's improve it. Let's say get user by ID. So this, let this be the by underscore ID. So this is the endpoint I will be using, and the name of the function is get user underscore by underscore ID as well. So that will be the name of the function that we are using. Okay, so what is the argument that we are going to take this time? Remember, this endpoint, for example, was having this input when we needed user in database session in order to do database functions, right? So here too, we need something. So we need an ID, right? And we need to state the data type as usual. But the data type of this shouldn't be um an integer, as because remember we changed it, we are no more using integer. We need to change it to, we are now using UUID, and the UUID is not in our file here right now, so we need to import it at the top. So let's go to the top and then do from UUID import UUID. So from UUID, this first UUID is a small UUID and the second one is a capital U, and the capital U one that we are using here. And as usual, it's going to be depending on database. We are going to call the database DB as the second argument, and it's going to be a session, and it will be equal to depends. It's going to depend on get DB function that we've done so far, right? Okay, it seems this is and check some stuff. So yeah, so basically this is what we are going to use. We'll be needing a UUID as the entry point, as the argument for this data type, and then it's going to be depending on this database session. Okay, how do we do that? So first we need to use this ID to fetch the user. We are going to say user will be equal to ID. So yeah, we are creating a variable called user because we are going to fetch a user using the UID. So how do we do that? We are going to say the user is equal to DB, mean the database dot query. Query means that we are making a request from the database, or we are making a search or do a particular function in the database. So query, we are querying the database, and then inside the database, the model in the database that we'll be using, or the table, is a user table, capital U. This model, we have it already, and we have imported it into this file here. So this is the model that we are using. So in the Python code is called a model, but in the database is called table. So for us to relate that to the table, so we are basically going to use the user table, right? So the user model in the table, basically, that's what we are using. So we are querying this, we are querying the database about a content from this user model, basically. But when we get there, when we get that particular database, we are going to because there's going to be a lot of users, right? A lot of users. So for us to fetch the one that we need to filter. We need to filter from there. So to filter, we do dot filter. We continue dot filter, meaning we are filtering the entire users, all the users in the database. So meaning we are searching, right? So the one we are going to filter out will be the user. So we are going to filter where the user model in the database ID is equal to the ID that we are bringing. So this ID, this user.id is the database ID inside. So we are going to be filtering based on the user ID model in the database, and then to a point where that ID from the database is equal to the ID that we are bringing. The ID that we are bringing is this one. So this equal to this ID is the one we are bringing here, and this particular dot id is the one already in the database, so it's user dot id. So we are going to be filtering basically, and then where we have users id, the user id from the model equal to the id that we are bringing, meaning there is a match. So where there is a match, then what we are going to return that, but we are going to put first at the end. Why do we add first at the end? So we know that every id is unique to every object. So if you don't add this first, when it is filtering, it will, whenever it sees a match, it's going to continue. If you don't add the dot first, the dot first just means that the very first time that you see a match, then you return that particular value. That's what basically it's doing. So we know that the user id is unique, so there's no point allowing it to continue even after finding a match. So when you see a match, you need to return quickly so that we don't have to wait for the database to be doing requests, to be creating a lot of delays. So we need to do dot first, so that whenever there is a first match, meaning that that's a specific thing that we want, so we return it. So that's why the dot first is really needed, right? So this is all the query. So let me go over this again. So we are creating a database, we are creating a user model because we are going to a user variable because we're getting a user, and then basically we are saying that we are getting the database, we are making a query, and a query on the model user model, meaning that the user table, right? And in that user table we are going to filter, we are going to filter where the user id from the model or from the table is equal to the id that we are bringing here. And then whenever we find that that's a match, whenever there's a match, then we return it with the dot first, so that we just stop there, right? The search doesn't continue, because even if it continues, you're not going to find any other one, because the ids are unique. Okay, so now when we are done finding out what should happen, we need to return user. So I'm going to return user basically. Okay, so this is okay, this is fine. Let's open our UVCon. I'm running the UVCon. Yeah, it's complete. Let's refresh this. So we are going to get user by id, right? I'm opening it. What do we have? So let me try it out. So if you are doing try it out this time, it will give you a section where you need to enter the id, and it's telling you that it's a UUID at the over there, so it should be a UUID. So if you tap any other thing yourself, like I'm just typing random thing into the id, and then you execute, they say please correct the following validation error. For id, value must be a GUID, so it's not valid. You need to enter a UUID value. How do we fetch that? Right, so first let's go to our database. This is our database. So from any of the column, this is the id, this is what we have already. So I'm going to copy that id for Francisca. So I'm selecting, you can press on Ctrl C, or you can click on copy here, then you have it copied on your clipboard. Then go back here, and I'm going to this section to paste it. If you paste it, you see that it's coming with some string, some quotation marks. So clean the quotation marks, so you just have the id alone. Now let me execute this. See what we have. We have the response body returning us the Francisca email, the last name, the id, and everything from there, right? So we're able to use the id to fetch the user id. But have you realized something? That the password is also coming out. So we need to use a model, right? That will filter how data will come out. Always when data is coming out, we don't expose some of the stuff. For example, the password, it don't need to be returned. So how do we do that? We solved that previously. Let's go over that. For us to do that, we need to define a response model, right? We need to define a response model. So we say response underscore model, it will equal to user out from the pydantic model that we did last time. So response model will be the one that will be coming out. So let's go and try it again. When I'm trying that, okay, we are not expecting to see the password. Yeah, so password is no more part of the payload. So you see password is no more part of the payload, right? That's fine. So we needed to use a response model. Okay, now let's assume we don't have this response model, or let's go and try one that the user is not in the database. Let me see it ends with dot f2 here. Me, I'll just change this last one. Let me write one, maybe change something at the last one. I will execute it. It says internal server error. So let me go to the database, and it's saying that blah 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 blah, that ID is not found in this thing. But this is not what we need to do. Whenever there's an error, we need not to be, the users will not be coming to see, we will not be having like VS Code terminal and be seeing the errors to correct it, right? We need to report what the specific error to the front end. We need to report a particular, the issue that is happening at the back end to the front end, so that the front end will know what actually is the issue, right? Okay, so how do we do that? So the ID that we entered is wrong. So in case that the ID is wrong, that's what we are going to. So we said if user is none, it means that if user is none, then we are going to return just a simple message, that message is a dictionary. I told you that you should be working with dictionary. User ID not found in database. So if user is none, meaning that if this user thing that we have over here is not found in the ID, we are going to return this message. But then let's remove this user because it's going to be this model here. What we are returning here doesn't match, will not match the user out model. So right now I'm going to clean it for now. I'm going to clean the response model for now, so that this one can be sent, this message can be sent. So let's see. I'm going to open it, execute this error wrong one again. So you see what it tells me, user ID not found in database. So basically that's what it's doing. So if the user is not found, then it's going to return user ID. But then let's see if it is found. Let's say I think it was 2 over here. So it was 2 over here. When I execute this, see what's happening. But the password is still following because I removed the response model. So how do we make sure that we return an error? We return an error that will not follow the response model, but we need the response model. Very important. Response model is very important. Response model is very important. So it's user out, right? We need this. So if you have this response model and you enter a wrong thing, let me see, execute. It's telling an internal server error. We need not to be telling front end that internal server error, right? So it means that this is not found, and then it's going to return a message in this model, but then this particular format dictionary doesn't follow the parenting mode or the response model. That will return an error. So there's another way of returning errors, a better way of returning errors when users are not found. That was what we're going to be calling exceptions. So basically, let's go to the top and import exception. So from FastAPI.depends, we are going to report something HTTP exception, and then we're also going to return import status. Status will help us understand the status of the error, and the exception will be the one to call out the error. So let's go back here and say, so if the user is not, meaning if it's not an ID, that's when we are going to call. But you shouldn't use the word return. You should not use the word return. We should use the word raise. You are going to raise an exception, so we call it HTTP exception, right? So now you open a bracket. They open a bracket. We are going to say the very first content to be, say, status code. The status code should be status code. This is, so we are going to do status dot http. So you can see from the list that VS Code is giving you here. So here user is not found, right? So you can see the from the list here a list of exceptions and then what they mean. And when we continue switching protocols, a list of them based on what is actually happening. That's why we imported status, so that status will tell us the specific error. But here we are going to use not found because it is not found, right? So we need to select this one. There are other ones based on what you want. Some are saying payment required, but right now it's not found. So 404, we click on that one, comma. After that, we need to give the front end a detail. So here I'm returning a detailed message. It's going to be a simple message that user, so there is no user with the provided ID. So let me say there is no existing user. Yes, there's no existing user with the provided ID, basically. So that's not fun. So it's going to raise this exception. So because of the Python user model, we need not to write our own dictionary here. If not, unless you want to write a dictionary that will match the user out model. But right now, if you want to actually report an error, the best way is to use an exception. So this is how to raise it whenever there's an issue. So this is a section that we'll be using mostly to report every error. We should not be allowing the front end to be looking to be having internal server error. Internal server error. So wherever there is possibility of having an internal server error, let's make sure that we raise an exception over there. So right, we raise an exception over there. Return will actually return the right thing if everything is correct. If the user is not found, it's going to return an exception or raise an exception, and that will be existing. So let's see it in action. Okay, so I'm currently having a wrong ID. I'm going to run this. Yeah, so it returns a detail that there is no existing user with the provided ID. So it has provided the ID for us. It has used the one that existing ones for us, right? So the raising the exception returns this detail message to the. So where do we see this HTTP4 not found? So you can see that if you go to the front end, you can see it here, error not found. You see it here, the code not found, and then detail is there is no existing user with the provided ID, so that the front end will actually understand. But if I have a right one like 2 and I execute, what will happen is that yes, I will now have a right in. I will still have my user out model, and then you see the password didn't follow. It means that the user out or the financing model has is also doing its function. If there's any error, this one will also do its function, and then at the end of the day, everything is sorted and properly done. This is how to rightfully get used by the ID. Now, follow the same format. Follow the same format to create an endpoint. To create an endpoint where we get the user by the email. It's possible to also get user by email, right? Not necessarily the ID. So let's do the same thing. This is an exercise for you. In the next session, we'll see how to complete that simple task.